Welcome to the May meeting of the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority. Thank you for your time today. Our agenda includes the review of the 2021-22 budgets and the 2022-2025 financial plans as submitted by the mayor to the BFSA. The review will include those of the City of Buffalo, the Buffalo City School District, the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency, and the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority. We will also review the third quarter reports of the city and the school district. Let's begin today's meeting with Secretary Floss taking the roll call of the directors.
Thank you, Chair Olson. Chair Olson, you're here?
Present, yep.
Vice Chair Jurasek?
Present.
Okay. Secretary Floss is here. Director Sanfilippo?
Here.
Okay. Mayor Brown? Donna is here. County Executive Poloncarz, Ben, you're here.
Present.
So, Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Fred. Our first item of business is to approve the minutes from the regular board meeting held on March 25th, 2021, and the special board meeting held on April 12th, 2021. Directors will find a draft of those minutes in the accompanying resolution in your board book under tab 1.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Are there any comments? Okay, hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Now we're going to go to a review of the city financial plan in Q3. Our next item of business is the review of the City of Buffalo's financial plan and the third quarter report. The mayor submitted the entire financial plan comprising the City of Buffalo and the covered organizations on April 30th, 2021. The budget for the City of Buffalo is in the process of review by the City Common Council, and no action has yet been taken on it. It is expected that a final submission to BFSA will be made by the mayor in June, which will incorporate the final approved budget. The final financial plan will be reviewed at the June meeting. The BFSA reports on the preliminary 2021-22 budget and the 2022-2025 financial plan, as well as the third quarter, have been provided under tab 2 of your board books. Jeanette and Bryce are prepared to provide us with an overview of these items. Bryce, would you please begin?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this afternoon. For the directors that are following with the slides, we're going to actually begin on page 38. We'll begin the overview with the city's third quarter report. The first slide we have here is comparing the adopted budget to the third quarter year end as of March 31st, 2021. At that time, the city is projecting to close out the year with the utilization of approximately $11 million of the federal rescue aid. There is a unfavorable variance projected for year end of $19.5 million for revenues and a favorable variance of $19.5 million for expenditures. This next slide actually backs out the $11 million of federal assistance to show where the other revenue lines are projected to be at year end. As a reminder, the city adopted budget was $519.6 million. Current year-end projection is $489.1 million. So that's a total unfavorable variance of $30.5 million. The significant revenues lines, that's a negative or unfavorable variance of $24.5 million, and then a negative $6 million or unfavorable variance of $6 million in regards to transfers in. And that's directly related to the transfers from the parking enterprise fund. So as I mentioned, the fiscal year and total revenue projections are 30.5 million under the adopted budget. 9.9 million of that is attributed to the intergovernmental revenue. The city had adopted a budget with 65 million in federal rescue funds. They've subsequently removed that from their year-end projection, which brings us to the approximate use of $11 million at year-end. Offsetting that decrease of 65 million was a favorable variance of 43.4 million in regards to New York State AIM, and then 14 million favorable variance in regards to the sales tax. Moving on to fines, they're currently projected to be under budget by 6.2 million, and this is directly related to the COVID-19 pandemic, as utilization of parking has significantly decreased in the past year and a half. So 3.6 million is attributed to parking fines, 2.4 million is attributed to moving violation tickets. A component of that is the non-implementation of the school bus camera arms that was originally part of the adopted budget. And then all their fines, net negative variance of 200,000. Moving on to miscellaneous revenue, there's unfavorable variance of 3.2 million, and that's attributed to the delayed sale of capital assets. Service charges have an unfavorable variance of 2.9 million. And major components of that include unfavorable variance of 1.8 million attributed to parking meter fees, 500,000 attributed to the default mortgage fees, 300,000 attributed to the foreclosure fees, and then the remaining service fees are net negative 300,000. Now, all other revenues are a net unfavorable variance of 2.3 million. Taxes are estimated to be unfavorable by 900,000. Earned interest is unfavorable by 900,000 as well. And then licenses and permits are going to be unfavorable by 400,000. And as I previously mentioned, the transfers in is attributed, that unfavorable variance of 6 million is attributed to the transfer from the Park Enterprise Fund. The adopted budget amount was 6 million, and subsequently it's been reduced to 0 for the year. Moving on to the third quarter expenditures. We just have a breakout, both departmental as well as general charges and transfers out. Summary here. Under departmental charges, total departmental charges totaled 237.6 million, and the year-end projection is 231.1 million, which is a favorable variance of 6.5 million or 2.7%. We'd like to note that the one department that is currently projected to be over budget is the fire department, which year-end estimate is 67.4 million or 4.4 million over the adopted budget amount. Moving down to general charges, total general charges under the adopted budget were 181.4 million. Year-end projection of 168.4 million, so it's a favorable variance of roughly $13 million. Savings are predominantly through the fringe benefits line. And then there's no variance in regards to the transfers out. Excuse me. So in total expenditure projections are 19.5 million below the adopted budget. As I said previously, 6.5 million is a budgetary favorable variance in departmental expenditures. Fire department exceeds the adopted budget by 4.4, and then the remaining departments are projected to have a favorable budget variance of 10.9 million. Significant savings or favorable variances are in the administration and finance department of 3.1 million, public works of 2.7 million, police department 1.7 million, human resources 900,000, and then the remaining departments net savings of 2.5 million compared to the adopted budget. Moving down to general charges, there is a 13 million budgetary projected favorable variance. 11.4 million of that is attributed to fringe benefits and the personnel service costs. So there's a 8.9 million favorable variance for the health insurance lines. There's a 2.2 favorable variance for pension contributions, 1.2 million favorable variance for workers' compensation, 500,000 favorable variance for dental insurance, which are offset by a 1.4 million unfavorable variance for the duty disability salaries and salary adjustment line or annual salary line. There's a $500,000 favorable variance in other category, and then a $1 million favorable variance in utilities. And as mentioned before, there is no projected variance for transfers out. At the end of the third quarter, the city had filled 2,418 positions out of the budgeted 2,688, leading to a vacancy rate of 270 positions, or roughly 10% of the workforce. Looking at the police department, there were 726 sworn officers filled out of 798 positions, leaving a vacancy rate of 72 sworn officers, or 9% of the budgeted police force. Under the fire department, 715 out of 742 positions were filled, leaving a vacancy rate of 26, or approximately 3.5% of the budget positions. I'd also like to note that at the end of the third quarter, there was approximately 38 firefighters and firefighter lieutenants that are currently out on long-term IOD. So those positions are filled, but they're unable to work out of their respective firehouses due to injury. Moving on to slide 48, the city has been awarded $331.4 million through the Federal American Rescue Plan. City will need to determine the restrictions on the use of available funding to be able to maximize it. Based on the anticipated receipt of the federal stimulus funding, deficit is not projected for year end. Currently, the city is estimating to use approximately 11 million in federal aid to close out the current year deficit. In addition to that, the city is looking at and planning to use an additional 25.3 million in federal aid to retire the deficit note that was issued in 2019-20 fiscal year. The tribal state compact revenue was budgeted at $11 million and is still included at the year-end projected as revenue. Little update on that. As we're aware, the arbitration panel found in favor of New York State. Subsequently, the U.S. Department of Interior issued a letter that will review the current compact extension, since the extension wasn't part of the original compact that was reviewed. Timing of the release of funds is unknown. Approximately, it's estimated 31 million is due to the city of Buffalo at this time. The non-receipt of the tribal state compact casino funds may result in the use of assigned fund balance, which was recorded at 12.7 million as of June 30th, 2020. In the event federal stimulus is unable to close the budget gap, deficit would result in further draws of unrestricted fund balance would occur. Unassigned fund balance totaled 50.8 million as of June 30th, 2020. And we recommend that the city continue to closely monitor its unrestricted cash balances, as any shortfalls were projected in certain months may require additional cash planning. So I apologize, I went through that rather quickly. If there's no questions from the directors at this time, I will move on to the review of the city's financial plan.
Okay,
Is
please.
it your understanding or looking at your report, it seems to me that from a structural standpoint, the long term going forward, that the city has been very prudent and conservative in their budgeting, and that the real reason for the deficit that we're seeing is, if not 100% COVID related, is tied to COVID issues. And so therefore, if we look out 2, 3, and 4 years forward, that we should be in reasonably good shape, particularly with the extra aim.
Excuse me, Director Floss, that is correct. As we'll get into in the financial plan, the out year revenue projections are more in line with what was included and received going back to fiscal year 2019. Kind of have to look at fiscal year 20 and 21 as those outliers, as COVID impacted the third and fourth quarter of 2020. And then we've lived with this pandemic and restrictions for the past year. So it's really the restrictions on some of the city's revenue sources that's really impacted their ability to generate. And it was a very favorable for the city in regards to state aim. I believe I said that was $43 million that they, following DOB's guidance, did not initially budget for in the current year, because their adopted budget included only $129 million, and state legislature and the governor came around to restoring that full amount. So the city did receive that during the current year.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment also?
Sure.
I mean, you talked about this capital assets and the lack of sale of capital assets. That 3.2 was from our in-rem sale that we have on an annual basis, which we did not have this year due to the pandemic. So it was not actual buildings that the city owned, it was the foreclosure sale, which you'll see in our 4-year plan.
Right, and the federal government wasn't. Yeah, and the federal government wasn't allowing for foreclosures. So that's, I would say, pandemic related. So I would just say that I think the 22 budget is probably still going to be impacted to somewhat, so that as we go forward and look at this, that we take that into consideration as we see all of this play out, that it's probably going to take longer to get back right to where we are or where we need to be because of this. I know everybody wants it to be done yesterday, but I don't think that that's going to be the case.
I agree with you.
Yeah, this is Andy. I wanted to ask a question as to what the comments were or the perspective from the city based on this report.
On the third quarter?
Yes. Are you in agreement to what Mr. Link has evaluated or analyzed on our behalf?
Yes, yes. I mean, some of the, certainly fire, it continues to have an overtime concern, as he mentioned. They have multiple people under IOD, which we are working on. We're in the process of hiring an additional personnel person over there to assist them, to hopefully keep on top of that a little closer. Okay. I think that really is the only area where we're kind of out of balance right now, I think.
Great.
And the revenues continue to be impacted by the COVID.
Okay.
Bryce and Donna, this is Jeanette. I address Donna because we may need more historical perspective. I'm looking at slide 47, and of the total positions budgeted, around 2,700, 270 as of this quarter are unfilled, and that yields a 10% unfilled rate. In the past, I think I had made the incorrect choice of descriptor by calling that a churn rate. So this unfilled rate, 10%, Bryce and Donna, how does that compare? This was an extraordinary year. How does that 10% compare to previous years of unfilled positions?
I would say we've historically been running around 10%. You know, we did not lay anybody off during the last year and a half. The mayor kept everybody employed, anyone who wanted to work, all our seasonals, all our full-time employees. So we kept our employees who wanted to work working.
Okay.
Bryce, maybe you have
So
you
if-
have the numbers in front of you, but I think 10% is kind of our historical average.
That is correct. Usually trending between 7.5% to 10% at the quarterlies. And the only time the city really gets below that vacancy rate is when they bring on a new, larger, either fire or police class.
Sure.
So when you have
that
that be anywhere from 30 to 50 recruits, and that'll bring down your vacancy number. But on the
Yeah,
flip side of
that-
that, as the year progresses, they have senior members of both departments begin to retire.
Sure. Okay. All right. So, Donna, in terms of internal policy, you restated what I recall. No one was furloughed, but we did have the mayor did give instructions to departments to leave positions, some positions open. Not so?
Yes, it did. We delayed hiring whenever we could.
Oh, okay. So that was all right. Good. Now I understand. So the extraordinary year did, how should I put it, force an extraordinary behavior inside this phenomenon, which is to say, there were instructions to not fill. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I'd just like to add that I think Donna and the mayor and the financial department were vindicated here in terms of their approach to the budget, not laying people off, standing resolute in the face of uncertainty, and it's paid off very well. The city was very well managed during this time. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we're going to review the district's financial plan and Q3 report.
Actually, Mills, at this time, I still need to review the city's financial plan.
Okay, go ahead. I'm not trying to shut you up.
Thank you, sir. Moving back to slide 2 for those using the slides, what we have here is basically the revenues and expenditures over the 4 years of the financial plan. Fiscal year 2021-22, revenues and expenditures are budgeted at $534.6 million, and over the financial plan they increase to $548 million. That's a total of $2.2 billion for revenues and expenditures over the 4 years of the financial plan. The next slide compares the 2020-21 adopted budget and the 2021 projected year-end to the 2021-22 proposed budget. So from a adopted budget to proposed budget, that's an increase of $15 million in revenues and expenditures. From a year-end perspective to the proposed budget, that's an increase of $34.5 million for both revenues and expenditures. And that estimate of $500.1 million does include the $11 million in Federal Reserve funds that are currently estimated to be used for year-end closeout. Just as a reminder, as of June 30th, 2020, total fund balance was $89.5 million. 38.7 of that was in a non-spendable restricted form. 38.1 million is in committed, otherwise known as the rainy day fund. And then there's 12.7 million that is assigned at this time. The city has no unassigned fund balance available to them at this time. This pie chart is a summary of the 21-22 estimated revenue that totals $534.6 million. As you can see, the two largest portions, approximately 35% each, are revenues generated by the city and the state. City is estimated at $189.8 million and the state at $185.9 million. The third largest category followed by that is county contributions of the city, approximately 86.5 million or 16%, largely the Erie County sales tax, followed by federal revenue at 58.7 million or 11%, transfers in at 9.2 million or 2%, and then all other revenues at 4.3 million or 1%. And then this next slide just is the estimated revenues under the adopted current year budget of 519.7 million. As you can see, there's a shift in both the city and the state. Last year, the city estimated more revenue than the current year at 42% versus 35%, decrease of almost $36 million. And then there's an increase on the state side going from roughly 28% up to 35 million. These other pieces, the county was at 71 million, and as we've seen, sales tax has actually come in higher than initially expected, much stronger than initially expected. And then the federal component of 68.4 million, and as you're aware, 65 million of that was attributed to the federal rescue funds, and currently the city has an estimate of 11 million that they're planning on using at year end. The next couple of slides, we're actually going to be drilling down to the various revenue lines by category. The first one we have here are taxes over the financial plan. One second. Taxes go from 156.8 million up to 165.8 million over the 4 years. Significant components of this include the real property tax levy, STAR, that's the STAR rebate for the property taxes on for homeowners. We have mortgage tax, pilot, and pilots. So, as I said at the beginning, taxes total approximately $156.8 million in fiscal year 21-22 and represent 29.3% of all budgeted revenues. Taxes are estimated to increase 5.7% or 9 million from 156.8 million to 165.8 million over the financial plan. And this increase is attributed to the real property tax levy. The city is currently utilizing 49.7% of the available taxing levy, which is 147.9 million. The city's kept that flat year to year, which means there is approximately 149.6 million available, or 50.3% of the constitutional tax limit is available. The real property taxes are budgeted at 142.3 million in fiscal year 22 and are projected to increase by 2.8 million or 2% to 145.2 million in 23. And then increases an additional 2% or 2.9 million to 148.1 million in fiscal year 24. And then increases an additional 2% or 3 million up to 151 million in fiscal year 25. This slide here is just a breakout of the 21-22 tax levy summary. As I said before, in total, 147.9 million will be raised through the tax levy. 77 million of that will stay with the city. 70.8 million will be transferred to the district for their operations. In total, and this slide also shows breakout the component that can be utilized for general fund. So in total, 113.4 million will be used by the district and the city for general fund operations. 30.5 million is being utilized for debt service. And then just in regards to the rates, the homestead rate is $9.88 per 1,000 assessed value. And then the non-homestead rate is $17.21 per 1,000 of assessed rate. Moving on to slide 10, we have intergovernmental revenues. This one is going to be one of the largest sections of our discussion. over the 4 years of financial plan, intergovernmental revenues go from 314.2 million down to 291.6 million. Significant intergovernmental revenues are state aim, which is held flat over the 4 years, sales tax collections, the tribal state casino, compact casino revenue, federal stimulus dollars, and the marijuana tax are the major components. So of the 314.2 million budgeted in fiscal year 21-2, that represents 58.8% of total budgeted revenues. Over the 4 years of the plan, intergovernmental revenues decreased by 9.3 million or 2% to 305 million in fiscal year 23, reduced a further 400,000 or 0.1% in fiscal year 24 to 304.6 million, and then a further decrease of 13.1 million or 4.3% to 291.6 million in fiscal year 25. The American Rescue Plan, ARP 2021, the city included 50.4 million in federal aid for fiscal year 22 and 22.7 million in fiscal year 23. As was previously mentioned, 331.4 million was awarded to the city. The city is committed using 73.1 million over the financial plan to make up for the loss of revenues in years 1 and 2. The city also intends to use approximately 36.3 million of federal aid in fiscal year 21 to address the current year-end projected deficit of 11 million, and to retire the 25.3 million deficit note with interest due. At this time, the BFSA is awaiting the city's submission of a plan to utilize the remaining federal ARP funds. Tribal state compact casino revenue. The city included 82.1 million in total casino revenue over the financial plan. This increases from 11 million in fiscal year 22 to 26.1 million in fiscal year 23, up to 30 million in fiscal year 24, and then reduced to 15 million in fiscal year 24. The increase of $15 million in both fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 represents the estimated cumulative outstanding balance of 30.1 million from previous years. Timing of the payments is unknown at this time, as was discussed during the third quarter presentation. And then the item of note, the current compact extension expires in 2023. Sales tax. Sales tax is estimated at 86.5 million in fiscal year 22 and increases by 5.7 million or 6.6% to 92.2 million in fiscal year 24-25. Sales tax increased by 15 million or 21% between fiscal year 21 and the proposed fiscal year 22 budget due to higher than expected sales tax collections during the current year. As a little reference, sales tax was budgeted at a decrease of 18.4 million in fiscal year 21 compared to the prior year to reflect the expectations from the impact of the pandemic. Actual sales tax collections through May 21 are currently at 82.9 million and are 2.2 million or 2.7% more than the prior year amount of 8.7 million during this same time period, and are actually 4.2 million more than the 2019 amount of 78.7 million. Over the financial plan, sales tax increases by 1.7 million or 2% to 88.2 million in fiscal year 23. It increases by 2.2 million to 90.4 million or 2.5% in fiscal year 24. And then an additional increase of 1.8 million or 2% in fiscal year 25 for a total of 92.2 million by the end of the financial plan. The marijuana tax is a new revenue source and is untested at this time. It is estimated at 16 million in both fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. So it's a total of $32 million in the last 2 years of the fiscal plan, financial plan. As I said, the marijuana tax is new and untested revenue with no history of collection to calculate potential sales tax revenue. And we've currently requested support of the revenue estimate. Moving down to fines, fines over the financial plan go from 6.3 million in fiscal year 22 up to 9.8 million in fiscal year 25. Significant fines include parking tag fines and penalties, traffic violation fines, court fines. The city did not include school zone cameras this year or the school bus arm cameras this year, which were both included in the previous fiscal year 21 budget. In fiscal year 21-22, fines will total 6.3 million or 1.2% of budgeted revenues. They increased by 3.5 million or 55.9% over the financial plan, and the increase is directly attributed to the parking tags, fines, and penalties. Miscellaneous revenues over the financial plan range from 16.9 million in fiscal year 22 up to 30.6 million in fiscal year 25. Significant components of miscellaneous include grant reimbursements, sale of capital assets, and the settlement of legal claims. Miscellaneous revenues are budgeted at 16.9 million in the fiscal year 22 proposed budget and represent 3.2% of all budgeted revenues. Sale of capital assets are budgeted at 5.5 million in fiscal year 21-22 and fiscal year 23-24. They then decrease to 3.9 million in fiscal year 23 and then are estimated to increase to 18.6 million in fiscal year 25. Over the 4 years of the financial plan, approximately 3.5 million each year is budgeted for the property foreclosure sales, the in-rem sales, except for in fiscal year 21 when the estimate's actually 5 million. There's an increase of 15.1 million in fiscal year 25, which represents the anticipated sale of a parking ramp. BFSA has requested a list of assets and valuations where available, and it is difficult to accurately predict from a timing perspective when this revenue will be collected and the sales are complete. The settlement of legal claims increases 4.2 million in fiscal 23, and that's attributed to ongoing litigation involving the opioid crisis. And that is the city's estimate of their portion of the settlement. Moving on to slide 20, this is all other revenues that we didn't get into detail on. These revenue sources include service charges, non-property tax, license and permits, and earned income interest. So in fiscal year 22, they are estimated at 31.2 million, and by the end of the financial plan, increase up to 35.5 million. So in the proposed fiscal year 22, the 31.2 million in other revenues represents 5.8% of all budgeted revenues. Minimal variance of revenues across the financial plan, increasing by 3.3 million or 10.6% over the 4 years. Service charges are budgeted to increase 2.3 million, and interest income is budgeted to increase by 900,000. So that was a overview of the city's projected revenues for fiscal year 22 and the revenues over the 4-year financial plan. At this time, I'm going to move, if there are no questions on revenues, I will move into the expenditure section.
Any questions? Okay, go ahead, please.
All right, thank you. So this pie chart here identifies the city's 2021 proposed budget and the 534.6 million in expenditures. The single largest category is the fringe benefits, at 169.4 million or 32%, followed by the interfund transfers out at 100.1 million or 19%. There's a couple components that interfund transfers out. Significant piece being the annual contribution to the school district at 70.8 million, approximately 28.8 million for debt service, and then 400,000 for capital outlay. The next area is the police department at 85.3 million or 16% of the budget, followed by the fire department at 66 million or 12%, public works at 33.4 million or 6%, utilities comprise 16.7 million or 3% of the projected expenditures, and then all other departmental and general charges total 63.7 million or 12% of the proposed budget. Slide 23 is a breakdown over the 4 years of the financial plan by departmental, general charges, and transfers out. So going from left to right, you see the adopted budget amount, or proposed, I'm sorry, that's actually a proposed budget amount of 242.3 million in fiscal year 22, increasing up to 250.5 million. And we identified the three larger departments, the police, fire, and public works over that time. Moving down to general charges, we've identified total fringe benefits, which increased from 162.4 million to 168 million, and it broken out specifically health insurance, pension, the salary adjustment line, and then all other fringe benefits over that period. Utilities are projected to increase from 16.7 million to 17.2 million over the 4 years of the plan. And then interfund transfers out are actually expected to be reduced from 100.1 million down to $99 million by the end of the financial plan. So year to year, from the current operating year to the proposed 21-22 budget, general fund expenditures are budgeted to increase from 519.6 million to 534.6 million, which represents an increase of 15 million or 2.9%. Fiscal year 22 total departmental spending is estimated to be 242.3 million. This includes projected amounts for step and wage increases. Estimated amounts included for future labor contract settlements are budgeted in the fringe benefits line. Year to year, the police department is decreasing by approximately 800,000. Fire department is increasing by 2.9 million. Public works is decreasing by 2.7 million. The administrative and finance department is decreasing by 2 million. And then all other departments on a net basis are increasing by 1.9 million year to year. Total general charges spending of 192.2 million. The city will continue to benefit from self-insured health insurance. There is a year-to-year increase for active employees in the amount of 6.9 million or 17.6%. This is reflective of an increase in number of employees as well as utilization. And then there's actually a decrease of 4.8 million year to year or 10.4% for retiree health insurance. This decrease actually brings retiree health insurance in line with recent historical actuals. Now, pension contributions are budgeted to increase by 6.2 million. That's an increase of 5.2 million or 16% for police fire retirement system contributions, and an increase of 1 million for the employee retirement system contributions. And then the salary adjustment line is budgeted at 4.9 million and decreases over the financial plan. Year to year, utilities are increasing by approximately 100,000 and the debt service costs are decreasing by 100,000. There is a decrease of 500,000 due under transfers out. That decrease of $500,000 is for the principal interest on outstanding debt payments. And there is no planned transfer of the solid waste and recycling enterprise fund. It's probably, I think, 4 years now that the city increased rates for the solid waste and recycling fund. And since then, they have not had to make this what was previously an annual transfer to subsidize operations. The city has not had to do that in the last 3 years. So moving on to slide 27. Expenditures are projected to increase 13.5 million or 2.5% over the financial plan. Fire department is the majority of the projected increase and is estimated to increase by 3.1 million or 4.7%. The police department is increasing 2.4 million or 2.8%. Public Works is increasing 400,000, and all other departments are net increase of 2.3 million. General charges are projected to increase by 6.4 million or 3.3%. Of this, fringe benefits are increasing 5.6 million or 3.5%. Significant increase on that is attributed to health insurance, which is increasing by 6.8 million. And then pension payments are also increasing or expected to increase by 1.4 million over that period. Utilities are increasing by $500,000 or 3% over the financial plan as well. Interfund transfers out decreased by 1.1 million over the financial plan. In fiscal year 22, they are budgeted at 100.1 million, and then they decreased to 99 million in fiscal year 25. Components of that, school district transfer is held flat at 70.8 million over the financial plan. The transfer of the capital debt service fund is at 28.8 million in fiscal year 22 and decreases to 27.7 million in fiscal year 25. And then the transfer to capital projects fund is flat at 400,000. And I already mentioned this is the fourth year that the interfund transfer out to solid waste and recycling fund is not included. Historically, that was between 3.2 to 3.5 million annually. And currently there is 13.3 million due to the general fund. And that's actually reflected in the general fund's fund balance as part of the non-spendable amount. Excuse me. Moving on to staffing. The city has increased the number of budgeted FTE positions by 9. So fiscal year 21, the adopted budget was 2,688, and that's increased to 2,697 positions. And that number's held over the financial plan, as are the number of budgeted sworn police officers at 798 officers, and the fire department budgeting for 742 firefighters. And at this point, I will turn it back over to Executive Director Rowe.
Thank you. Before I begin my summary comments on the financial plan, I wanted to express my gratitude to all of my staff for their hard work in preparing the materials that you have today for today's meeting. Bryce and Nathan, the analysts over the city of Buffalo, Borough, Nathan is the school district and BMHA. They put in substantial time over the past few weeks, and I want to thank them very much for their efforts in getting all of this together for us. I also want to express my gratitude to the mayor and the commissioner of finance, not only for their work and effort that went into the financial plan, but also for working so closely with the analysts to be able to conduct the review that was conducted for you today. So thank you, Donna. And then it would be remiss of me to not thank the individuals at the covered organizations for their collegiality in working with our folks as well to provide this information. I want to thank the district officials, including the Superintendent Cash and the CFO, Jeff Pritchard, Tracy Cooley from the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency, and BMHA officials and their finance staff, including Gillian Brown, Modesto Candelario, John Walters, and Teresa Spagna. So just my thanks before I start with the comments. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can get to full screen mode. All right. So, as we are aware, the City of Buffalo is the recipient of a significant amount of federal stimulus funding over this past bill that was passed and was awarded $331.4 million. Regulations on the use of these dollars were recently released on May 10th and are being reviewed to understand the allowable and the appropriate use of these dollars for the City of Buffalo within the general fund. The 21-22 budget as proposed by the mayor is balanced with an estimated $50.4 million of federal stimulus funding and $11 million in casino money or tribal state compact revenue. As of today, based on our consultation with the city, the inclusion of federal stimulus at this level does appear reasonable. The overall question that's existed for a number of years regarding the timing of when the casino money will be received, it continues to be a question. The amount in the financial plan overall is reasonable at $82.1 million. So we don't question the amount. Our concern is continued to be what is the timing of the receipt of this money. So the inclusion of the casino revenue over the financial plan does represent a significant risk, as non-receipt of this funding would have a significant impact on the operations of the city, as well as there's a kind of a question regarding what will the contract look like when it's renegotiated. It is expiring in 2023, and the City of Buffalo has included casino revenue projections based on the terms of the current compact agreement. Irrespective of not having any terms for a new agreement, that does seem like a reasonable approach at this time. The financial plan includes 2 revenue sources that we've requested support for, and I want to thank Donna for starting to work with us and getting that information over to us. She's also coordinating with other departments where we're waiting on some information, and those 2 revenues items that Bryce referred to is the marijuana tax and the sale of property. As we are unable to conclude on the reasonableness of these revenue projections, technically the financial plan is not compliant with the BFSA Act. So that's been built into the draft resolution that was distributed to you yesterday. So the draft resolution does request this information be submitted no later than June 1st, and we will circle back with you, the board of directors, at our June board meeting. As expected, we'll have a revised financial plan at that time to reflect the adopted budget after council adopts that item. The financial plan includes $127.2 million of non-recurring revenues. Of this amount, $73.2 million represents the federal stimulus and supplants revenues. Presumably, as revenues return to pre-pandemic levels, the need for this federal stimulus is replaced by the increase in the revenues to pre-pandemic levels. I think that would address some of the comments that Director Floss had earlier during the quarterly report, that is built into the financial plan, that assumption that revenues do return to pre-pandemic levels, but not all at once, that it is incremental over the financial plan. The remaining amount of non-recurring revenue is $54.2 million over the financial plan. This is indicative of imbalance, as such funding is not sustainable. It is used, these are one-time dollars that are being used to support recurring expenditures. Included in the $54.2 million is overdue casino revenue of $30.1 million. Sale of property of $19.5 million. That's in addition to the in-rem sales. And then the estimated settlement for a legal claim related to That was the opiate litigation that Bryce referred to of 4.6 million. So in future years, revenues will need to be generated to replace these one-time revenues or expenditures decreased. Let's see. So we continue to comment that the financial plan will require close monitoring as unfavorable results would impact the unrestricted fund balance, which is at low levels. Unrestricted fund balance at June 30th, 2020 was 50.8 million, which consisted of 38.1 million of the Emergency Stabilization Fund, which we refer to as the Rainy Day Fund, 12.7 million of assigned fund balance with no amount in unassigned fund balance. The GFOA recommends no less than 2 months of regular operating expenditures be held as unrestricted fund balance. So based on this calculation, it would be between 72.5 million and 89.1 million, depending on whether or not you include transfers in the calculation. And this would be what GFOA would recommend would be retained at June 30th of 2021. So the city is currently under this recommended level, and our recommendation is that the city consider a fund balance replenishment program, at which point it would make sense to do that. Recovering from a pandemic, obviously, is probably not the time, but as the years progress, a fund balance replenishment program is something the city should seriously look at. The city may be underestimating overtime in police and fire. Vacancies have typically been able to cover this type of overtime charge, but it is an area that we cite annually in our report, and we continue to cite that in our report. Other areas of significance to highlight that we have brought to the board annually is the use of parking fund monies to support general fund operations, and that is projected at 14.5 million over the financial plan. We're comfortable with the projections. It certainly was adjusted for the pandemic and for a slow recovery over those 4 years. The city is maintaining its level of effort with the school district at 70.8 million over the financial plan annually, which is equal to 48% of the total tax levy. And the final comment is, I'll just briefly mention it because Bryce just mentioned it, which is the Solid Waste and Recycling Fund. Over a number of years, it had built up a substantial amount due to the general fund. That amount has slowly been paid off as cash surpluses are generated. The balance was 13.3 million at the end of last fiscal year. We'll be evaluating, what happened with that when we get the financial reports for this year. But our analysis does show that that fund is in fact self-sustaining and is no longer drawing on the general fund, as has been the case for the last couple of years as well. So there are areas to be monitored as noted. That's expected in the ordinary and normal course of business of operating a municipality. We overall conclude that revenue projections are reasonable, excluding those 2 items that we still need to get comfort over. And expenditures are also reasonably projected. An important add-on to these comments is that the mayor and the commissioner of finance has ensured that expenditures reflect all expected expenditures, meaning what I mean by that is any estimate for unsettled labor contracts has been built into the financial plan. So that is not a piece that's excluded, and they've planned for that accordingly. And that's an important distinction. So with that, Chair Olson, that summarizes our review and our comments for the board, and I will turn it back to you.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay. So now we turn to review of the Buffalo City School District's 2021-22 draft budget and related four-year financial plan, along with a summary of the third quarter report. Any changes made to this submission pursuant to the adoption of the budget by the Buffalo Board of Education will be subsequently reviewed by BFSA at the June meeting. The staff reports on these items have been provided under tab 3 of your board books. Nathan and Jeanette have prepared an overview of these items for us. Nathan, could you please begin?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. The following is BFSA analysis of the Buffalo City School District's fiscal year 2021 third quarter financial results. Review the third quarter results from the current fiscal year and then move into the budget and financial plan review. For starters, there's some significant federal action which was discussed in the previous presentation. This is the district's impact. Back on December 27th, 2020, the U.S. Coronavirus Response Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act of 2021 was signed into law. This was a close to $1 trillion in various COVID-19 related programs. The district's impact for that was, or will be, $88.6 million over the next 3 fiscal years. Following that, another major piece of legislation was passed on March 11th, 2021. The American Rescue Plan was signed into law. This totaled $1.9 trillion, including $12.6 billion in direct aid for New York State. And in this table below, it summarizes the district's $201 million in funding that will be received over the next 3 fiscal years. All in all, between the 2 pieces of legislation, the district is estimating $289.6 million over the next 3 fiscal years. There's several significant third quarter events which I'll review. Back on February 1st, 2021, Buffalo City School District began a phased reopening wherein a predetermined group of students returned for in-person learning on a hybrid learning model basis. Phase 2 was initiated on March 22nd with students from grades 3, 4, 9, and all high needs students returning to the classroom. And then on April 1st, 2021, the superintendent notified the public that the remaining quote unquote opt-in high school students would return, along with the remaining opt-in elementary students returning later at May 10th, 2021. Also significantly here, March 12th, 2021, the district was a victim of a cyber attack. The result was a loss of computer files and system inoperability. The aforementioned phase 2 cohorts return to in-person instruction was deferred by 1 week. The district incurred and will incur significant costs to restore system operability, to conduct an investigation, and to install the necessary safeguards to minimize future exposures. These costs are yet to be determined. And at present, the district has not fully restored its student management, facilities management, and financial operating systems. On March 31st, 2021, the Board of Education voted and opted not to renew the charters for both district authorized charter schools, the Enterprise Charter School and Westminster Community Charter School. The current plan is to close Enterprise and to reopen Westminster as a district elementary school. Here we see a depiction of general fund revenues, expenditures in the modified budget, the current fiscal year end projections, and then the variance between the two. Revenues are pretty close to budget and are projected to be $2.4 million less than budget at fiscal year end. Expenditures are significantly less than budget and are projected to be $67 million less than budget at fiscal year end. This is a $14.5 million actual surplus projected or forecast. Taking a look at the revenues, there's some minor fluctuations between some of the revenue lines here. Erie County sales tax is forecast to be $4.5 million greater than budget. The 2021 budget took a very conservative look at sales tax given the recession. Sales tax numbers are almost identical to what they were 1 year ago, and therefore it's much more in line with what we've seen in recent years. It's a significant variance from what was originally budgeted. Federal CARES and Medicaid reimbursements are projected to be unfavorable by $3.1 million. This is a timing issue. There's $3 million in CARES funding, which was budgeted to be received in the current fiscal year that will be received in the following fiscal year. And then a combined $3.8 million unfavorable variance between some of the small expense-based aids of New York State and the miscellaneous revenues. So overall, an unfavorable current fiscal year variance of $2.4 million is projected at fiscal year end for revenues. Taking a look at expenditures, this slide shows total compensation, total benefits, the payments to charter schools, debt service, transportation, and then all other expenditures. We'll break this down a little bit more in a moment, but it's a very significant variance, $67 million. And the biggest impact on current fiscal year expenditures has been that the model adopted in the budget was assuming a full year traditional school with phased in returning not starting until February. There's been different variances all over different expense lines. For example, with employee compensation, the current fiscal year end variance is $18.1 million overall. The most significant factor attributing to this is a sizable 165 full-time equivalent vacancies at March 31st. Additionally, we note that several of the compensation lines appear to be overstated given the terms of their current contracts and the composition of the employee base. Likewise, employee benefits are forecast to be $14 million favorable at current fiscal year end. There's a couple of things going on here with fewer actual employees versus budgeted. There's lower employee compensation leading to lower civil service retirement, teacher retirement, and Social Security systems. That contributes to the $3.6 million favorable variance with that. And then significantly too, with health insurance, active employees and retirees, the current fiscal year projection is $9.2 million less than budget. That's based on what was assumed a year ago for actual needs versus what we know now, what the actual health insurance claims have been during the current fiscal year. This table shows 2021 third quarter employee counts on an all funds and a general fund basis. Actual employees on an all funds basis were 222 less than budget. On a general funds basis, it was 165 full-time equivalent employees less than budget. The payment to charter schools is forecast to be $2.3 million favorable. Actual payments to area charter schools were $103 million at March 31st, almost $12 million less than the budget to date amount. This is attributed to the actual number of full-time equivalent pupils within area charter schools. So as noted, it has not been, of course, a traditional school year. Full in-person learning did not or has not started. Phased-in began in February. So likewise, transportation needs have been much less than what was included in the adopted budget. Right now, the current fiscal year end forecast for transportation expenditures is $29.2 million, a $29 million favorable budgetary variance. And I note that the district receives an approximate 90% reimbursement for eligible transportation related expenditures in the form of the following year's New York State transportation aid. All other expenditures are on a combined basis forecast to be $3.6 million less than budget at fiscal year end. Notably, the interfund transfer is $5.2 million favorable. This is an accrual for potential New York State reimbursement grant losses. It was accrued at June 30th, 2020, assuming that based on what the state had passed in the budget, there may be some holdbacks of New York State grants. That has not happened, and therefore the accrual has been reversed. So just to conclude on the current fiscal year, the district is forecasting a total $14.5 million surplus and a substantial $64.6 million budgetary surplus. District has identified certain COVID-19 related expenditures of $8.1 million, of which $7.5 million is recorded within the general fund. These are expenditures which may be reimbursable at a later date through federal sources. The district had an employee vacancy rate of 3.4% at March 31st, as reported within the general fund. District has forecast a $32 million current fiscal year end favorable budgetary variance in combined employee compensation and benefits based on the level of vacant positions at March 31st. The state fiscal year 2021 enacted budget included the potential for significant cuts to New York State aid. This was really sizable. The impact on the district was initially quantified at $110 million. With the enacted budget for the current year, New York State DOB conveyed that all school districts would be made whole for any previous withholdings and that no cuts would occur. Erie County sales tax has been more favorable than initially estimated despite a recession, which officially began during the district's 1920 third quarter. At March 15th, 2021, actual sales receipts were just about where they were 1 year prior. This is a 10% or $4.5 million favorable variance. And then finally, as noted, that the cyber attack in March has disrupted district operations, the impact of which is still being assessed. It has impacted and will impact the current fiscal year as well as the upcoming fiscal year. The 2021 adopted budget included the assumption that district enrollment would decrease and that the budgeted number of teachers could be reduced at a rate of 6.5 teachers per 100 pupils. Then I note that the modified budget increased the number of budgeted teachers by 17, while the actual number of pupils were significantly less by 2,250 full-time equivalent pupils. So the inverse has happened. As teachers have been added, enrollment has dropped, and it appears that this cut has not been implemented. Overall, the district's year-end projections are conservatively made, with the final operating results expected to exceed the current projections favorably. That concludes my brief overview of the district's third quarter financial results. Are there any questions?
I'd just like to add a comment to say that looking at these financials, it is amazing that they were able to do the work that they've done for the school district with little or no increase in staff. And that really says something about the commitment to both the teachers, aides, and the administrators, that they were able to come through the pandemic, I think, without seeing the increased costs that we expected to have when this started. So I think they need to be commended.
Agree. City and the district did a really fine job. Any other questions for Nathan? Okay. So we move on to what? Buffalo Urban Renewal.
Chair Olson, I just concluded the third quarter. I was going to review the budget financial plan.
Okay, go right ahead.
Just for those with the printed slides, I'm moving backward from slide 88 to slide 70 here, or excuse me, to slide 50. There we go. Okay, so slide 51. The draft budget and the adopted financial plan were submitted to the BFSA on April 30th, 2021. The financial plan was actually approved on April 21st. The district plans to review and approve the budget this evening. The draft budget includes a deficit of $29 million. Each out year of the financial plan depicts surpluses. Understandably, the pandemic and the recession have deeply impacted New York State's finances. New York State DOB estimated New York's decreased revenues in excess of $10 billion. The U.S. Congress has passed legislation, as noted in the third quarter review, to address the pandemic and to aid in the economic recovery. So several of the main cost drivers for the district have reduced rates of increase over the financial plan, including health insurance for both active and retirees, as well as pension payments. Curbing the rate of growth within these two expenditures was a focus in the deficit closing and cost savings initiative plan. District has budgeted the appropriation of $29 million of fund balance for fiscal year 21-22. This is largely a result of a one-time mismatch between New York State transportation expenditures and New York State transportation aid. The district is reimbursed at a rate of 90% of prior fiscal year eligible transportation expenditures. And so lower transportation expenditures in the current fiscal year reduced transportation aid in fiscal year 21-22 by about $24.4 million. Moving along, the 21-22 draft budget includes $943.5 million in revenues. Expenditures are in excess of that by $29 million at $972.5. Therefore, fund balance will be used to close that gap. Fiscal year 21-22 is the only year in the financial plan where expenditures exceed revenues. The overall surplus is very minor, $1.7 million on a combined basis. Out year 1, 2, and 3 all have projections where revenues would exceed the current projected expenditures. And then just to note there's between 23, 24, and 24, 25, revenues actually decline a little bit. This isn't a decline in any operating revenue, but rather a decline in non-operating New York State building aid. So taking a closer look at the 22-25 financial plan general fund revenues. General fund revenues total $943.5 million in the draft budget. The total increase in revenues over the 4 years of the financial plan is $70.2 million, or about 7.4%. The 2021 adopted budget included a $29.6 million New York State pandemic adjustment, which was an offset for federal CARES restoration of, or which was offset by federal CARES restoration aid of the same amount. The pandemic adjustment was instituted in 2021 and it had been assumed to continue across the next few fiscal years, absent additional federal funds. Federal funds were, of course, received, and so the New York State enacted budget eliminates the pandemic adjustment as unnecessary based on the CRRSA and ARP's passages. New York State aid is projected to grow to about 80% of total budgeted revenue by 24-25. So just taking a look at state aid, New York State aid at $692.6 million is about 71% of the total general fund revenues. In 2021, New York State aid declined as a percentage of total revenues for the first time in about a decade. With the pandemic adjustments elimination and the increase in total New York State aid overall statewide by $3 billion, the increase in 21-22 is substantially higher than in 2021. The New York State 21-22 enacted budget and the related four-year financial plan provide substantial increases in foundation aid for the district. The year-to-year increase in foundation aid is $67.5 million, or 8%, with foundation aid totaling $747.2 million within the enacted budget. Furthermore, New York State has committed to eliminating the pandemic adjustment going forward. This adjustment reduced New York State aid by $29.6 million, but was supplanted with federal aid. Similarly, New York State passed legislation expecting the full funding of New York State foundation aid by 23-24, providing an approximately 4.5% increase annually for fiscal year 22-23 and 23-24. So in total, the financial plan includes $122.7 million in incremental foundation aid for the district. General fund expenditures total $972.5 million in the draft budget. Expenditures are projected to total $1,012.8 million in 2024-25, an increase of $40 million or about 4% over the financial plan. It's a compound annual growth rate of 1.4% over this period. Total employee compensation is budgeted at $337.2 million in the draft budget and increases $9.5 million to $346.7 million over the financial plan. The district has included $197 million for employee benefits in the draft budget. These expenditures increased by $22.3 million or 11% over the financial plan. The projected year-to-year increase in general fund expenditures represents lower average annual increases than has been seen historically, particularly within employee benefits and within charter school payments. Debt service payments decreased significantly as well over the financial plan. This table includes the district's financial plan staffing as compared to the fiscal year 2021 adopted plan. Additionally included are the employee compensation for each group. And I wanted to note that the compensation increases were based on contractual steps, less some assumed attrition of the workforce. Most of the employee groups will be out of contract by the end of the next fiscal year. The following depicts 10 years of district full-time equivalent employees, takes a look back to fiscal year end 15-16, and then includes all the way up through the out year 3 of the financial plan, fiscal year 24-25. This is the total full-time equivalent count on all funds as well as a general fund basis. Fiscal year 21-22 budgeted staffing is the highest since BFSA's inception back in 03-04. And I just alluded to the fact that most labor contracts are either expired or will be expiring. All collective bargaining units have labor agreements that will be expired or scheduled to expire by June 30th, 2022. The draft budget and financial plan does not accrue compensation or benefit increases associated with settling these expired contracts. However, the district did provide an estimate that the incremental expenditures would be about $9.9 million of combined compensation and benefits annually. The financial plan includes a total of $9 million in assigned fund balance for this purpose. Just note that this set aside would be insufficient to settle all the cumulative close to $40 million estimate to settle all outstanding labor contracts within the general fund. The following provides a snapshot of the various employee groups with their average 21-22 salaries, average total compensation, including fringe benefits, as well as the contract expiration dates. So we wanted to take a look at the status of the district's fund balance. Fund balance has grown pretty substantially over the last few years. The middle column there shows fund balance projected at June 30th, 2021. And then the final column shows it projected at June 30th, 2022 through the end of the financial plan. Since fund balance is only assumed to be used in 21-22, the 3 out years of the financial plan are held at the same level. The gap closing plan that was initiated in fiscal year 18-21 is when when fund balance started really to grow. The total fund balance grew from $182.6 million at June 30th, 2017, up to $266 million projected at June 30th, actual at June 30th, 2020. Fund balance is anticipated to increase by $19 million in the current fiscal year. The following provides historical district enrollment, following provides both historic and projected public school enrollment for the district and charter schools. This goes all the way back to BFSA's inception in 03-04 and all the way up through the projected enrollment numbers in 24-25. District is currently projecting a declining enrollment within district schools while projecting an increase of about 1,100 or 11% in charter schools over the financial plan. However, the pandemic's long-term enrollment impact is really unknown. Current school enrollment in both charters and district is down from what was originally projected. So these projections in the out years are based just on what the data that is known now. It's really being sorted out what the next few years enrollment will look like and how deeply the pandemic will impact enrollment. And I went over that one pretty quickly. Were there any comments? I know this had been I had provided this slide because it had been a subject of conversation in the past.
Nathan?
Yes.
Nathan, this is Jeanette. Debt service in the projected budget is around $109 million, and it slides down to around $90-ish million in the life of the plan. The joint school, the construction project, let's see, when was that completed? 13, 14 years ago? Will there be, and I'm assuming that is a big chunk of the that has to be serviced with that $109 million. Do you know when and if there will be relief in the budget? Because what was that? Well, you know the numbers. It was a gigantic project. 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion.
It ended up 1.5. Yeah.
1.5. So in the foreseeable future or 20 years out, will they be able to retire that damn burden?
Yeah, a lot of it is, of course, being paid down now. The district has been refunding and plans to refund some of those borrowings, and has been using a lot of the savings from that for a lot of the capital work instead of borrowing. It's been doing that for years. The exact date of when that is all paid off, I don't know offhand, but I could certainly get that back to you today. But I apologize, I don't know it offhand.
No rush, but I'm imagining, and of course may just be imagination, that there may be considerable relief around the corner. When is the corner? In 5 years or 15 years? When they've repaired that debt. And I understand, yes, as you said, as opportunities afforded themselves, they've been refinancing debt. I understand. But still my naive question, in the next 5 years, 6, 7, 8 years, will there be some relief on the debt side? Thank you in advance for checking that.
Certainly.
Could I ask a question regarding the status of the contract negotiations with the expired unions? Are they in negotiation right now with any of these contracts?
Yeah, I'm assuming that there is ongoing negotiations, but I'm not privy to those conversations. I would have to defer to the district management for an update. I've only been provided that they're working with the labor unions on contracts.
Well, okay. I mean, looking at some contracts expired in 2010, some in 2012. I just didn't know where they are with the teachers right now. I'm just curious, that's all. Are there negotiations going on? Is there someone from the school district that could answer that?
We have the CFO on the line. I could defer the question to him, Mr. Chair, if that was appropriate.
Yeah, please.
We did.
So there's no one from the school district that is on?
We have CFO Pritchard. Are you on the line still? He may have stepped aside for a moment.
Okay, I just was trying to get an idea if there was any updates on all these expired contracts, because that would have somewhat of an impact on how much they have set aside.
Absolutely. It is a question that I have asked. I'm not given a lot of detail other than they're confidential and they are ongoing.
Okay, well, like I said, it's an outstanding question, and if at some point someone could reach out to the school district just to see, I mean, I understand the COVID and certain things that affect their ability to negotiate, but I just was wondering, it's been several years since several of these contracts have been expired. I was just wondering what's taken so long.
I will absolutely reach out and see if I can get more detail.
Thank you. And let me also add my compliments to the staff too for their outstanding research and analysis of all of these budgets. I think you've done an outstanding job.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
For the short turnaround too. Any other questions for Nathan or? Okay, now Jeanette, what do we do next?
I had a couple comments on the financial plan.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely.
Nathan, I'll let you control the screen if you don't mind.
Not a problem.
So the district, they presented an operationally balanced financial plan beginning with 21-22, which was the original goal when the gap closing plan was created back in 2017. So although, on paper, you see 29 million of fund balance being utilized in 21-22, it's due to the transportation expenditures, the there's always a 1-year lag when transportation aid comes in for transportation expenditures. So that's being carried forward to 1 year. Can you go to the previous slide, Nathan? I'm sorry. Previous one. Maybe I should do this. I'm so sorry.
You wanted the conclusion section or the?
I've got it. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So anyways, the 21-22 budget essentially transfers the savings from transportation costs from this budget into the next year budget. So when we look at the financial plan overall, we confirm and support the district's position that it's a balanced financial plan. The financial plan does not include, importantly, expenditure projections for the settlement of labor contracts. There is a $9 million set aside in reserves for it. The district has estimated that to bring all contracts current, it would cost incrementally $9.9 million annually. So there is a shortfall between what the annual cost would be compared to the set aside in fund balance, that any excess costs would need to be addressed during the negotiation process and the determination if the contracts are affordable. This is also noted by the district within their financial plan that additional costs would need to be addressed. The final budget is on the agenda for the Board of Ed meeting to be held later today. The financial plan, it was developed using consistent underlying key assumptions as adjusted, except for one exception, which is the assumption, it's built into the financial plan that for every 100 students that move from district enrollment to charter school enrollment, there can be a reduction in the number of FTE teachers by 6.5. The total change over the 4 years of the financial plan is a net decrease in 71 positions based on this assumption. The associated compensation decrease is 11.5 million. There's a couple other underlying assumptions built in, one of which is that there will be no new charter schools within the city of Buffalo. There has been state legislation requested, which is still pending. And it also assumes, and Nathan alluded to a very significant point, which is there's a lot of discussion regarding what is happening, what has happened with enrollment in general due to the pandemic. Have students dropped out? How substantial, significant is that? And how will it affect all school districts, this school district, over the next 4, 5, 6, 10 years? The district is budgeted to receive substantial increases in state foundation aid, which we have not seen before. It's increasing 8% alone year to year, or 67.5 million. And then it increases another 4.5% in year 2 and another 4.5% in year 3. And it's all based on legislation that was passed at the state level to fully fund foundation aid by 2023-24. This accounts for a total increase in foundation aid to the school district, which is all general fund dollars, of 122.7 million. And then finally, again, this unprecedented level of federal aid that has been awarded to the district of just under $290 million. This is all outside of the general fund. It's in the special grants fund. A plan for the use of these dollars is required to be completed, submitted, posted by July 1st. So we will certainly circle back with you, Board of Directors, to review that plan following that, following the submission on that. So thank you for my comments, and Nils. I will turn it back to you.
Okay, that wraps up the school district, correct?
That does.
Okay, we'll now review the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency's 2021-22 proposed budget and related 4-year financial plan. Any changes made to the budget, financial plan pursuant to approval by Borough's Board of Directors will be reviewed at our June board meeting. Copy of the staff's analysis of this plan is provided under tab 4. Bryce has prepared an overview for us. Bryce, would you please begin?
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the board again. My presentation at this point will be, excuse me, on the Bureau 2022-2025 financial plan. Bureau received the Year 47 Entitlement Funds Award notice from HUD on February 25th, 2021.
What slide number?
I'm sorry, we are on slide 90, Director Jurasek.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the initial award letter indicated that there would be a reduction of $38,500 in entitlement fundings. Excuse me. Subsequently, this past week, the city received a revised entitlement letter, which will increase the year 47 allocation by approximately $200,000. So this information will be updated in the June report. Bureau received an additional $11.4 million from the Community Development Block Grants CARES Act funding, which we reviewed at the March meeting in regards to their budget modification. Out-year revenues are budgeted conservatively, with decreases attributed to spend down of outside grants, especially the CDBG CV funds. Year to year, there's a decrease of 19.2% in fiscal year 23, a decrease of 18.4% in fiscal year 24, then a decrease of 9.8% in fiscal year 25. Over the financial plan, subrecipients will receive approximately $2.8 million from Bureau in fiscal year 1, and then this amount decreases over the 4 years down to $700,000 by year 4. And then the decrease in regards to the subrecipient funds is directly related to the spend down of the one-time allocations. So this next slide here, slide 91, identifies the 4 entitlement grants that are received by the City of Buffalo and Bureau, including the Community Development Block Grant, Home, Emergency Shelters Grants, and the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. I'd like to point out that both the ESG and the HOPWEL grants are directly administered by the city. The next slide, slide 92, identifies those 4 grants, entitlement grant sources we just discussed. However, it splits it between the amount that Bureau is receiving and maintaining and what is provided or the city retains. So mind you, this is based on the original award letter from HUD. Initially, it was $19.4 million allocated, with $10.6 million going to Bureau and the balance of $8.8 million going to the City of Buffalo. And once again, this will be revised upward with the addition of the CDBG funding that the city was just awarded this past week. The 2022-2025 financial plan, as it's presented, is reflective of all known and estimated revenues, including the entitlement funds, program income, and additional grants, which include CDBG-CV, the Evans Fund, LISC funding, Cities Rise, and other restricted funds. Financial plan includes resources in the first 3 years of the financial plan for negotiating a labor agreement between Bureau and local CSE 815. The previous CBA expired on June 30th, 2020. Bureau is in the process of negotiating with the union at this time. The financial plan does include separate projections for salaries and fringe benefits. So on to slide 94. This slide breaks down revenues and expenditures over the 4 years. Fiscal year 22, total revenues are estimated to be, are budgeted at 21.3 million, the most significant being 7.2 million in CDBG, 6.6 million in CDBG CV funding, 3.4 million in home funding, 900,000 for the CDBG home and program income, and then 3.2 million for all other grants, including the one-time grants, for a total of 21.3 million. Over the 4 years, you'll notice that the CDBG, including prior allocation, actually increases from 7.2 million to 7.5 million. The CDBG CV income, which totals 11.4 million, actually is reduced over the financial plan as it's spent down, and it was a one-time resource. Home allocations are held fairly steady over the financial plan, 3.4 million in the first year, and then held flat in fiscal years 23 through fiscal year 25. Program income is held flat, 900,000, and then you'll see a decrease in the other income as the one-time revenue spent down, going from 3.2 million down to 800,000. The expenditures are equal to the revenues. So over that time period, it goes from 21.3 million total expenditures down to 12.7 million. And what I'd like to point out there is you'll notice the program costs, where a lot of these one-time resources are going, is decreasing from 17 million in fiscal year 22 down to 8.7 million in fiscal year 25. The administrative and planning costs are held fairly consistent over the budget, going from 4.3 million in year one down to 4.1 million in fiscal years 23, 24, and then 4 million in the final year of the financial plan. Excuse me. So in fiscal year 21-22, CDBG funding has been budgeted in the amount of 8.2 million. Of that amount, 5.2 million is for program delivery. 3.5 of that is for the emergency loan program. 1.5 million is for program delivery costs, and then 200,000 for crime prevention program delivery, which leaves 3 million for administrative costs. Home funding in fiscal year 22 has been budgeted in the amount of 3.6 million. That consists of 3.2 million for the home program delivery, which can be further broken down to 2.6 million for the rehabilitation and new construction program, 500,000 for the community housing development organizations, 100,000 for home program delivery costs, and then a balance of 400,000 for administrative costs. And just as a reminder, on slide 96, we have this identifying the caps the administrative costs are held to. So this is the entitlement funds are limited to certain maximum % grant award. As a reminder, CDBG is the 20% plus program income. Home is at 20 or 10%, and then CDBG CV is 20% as well. However, the city, the administration has decided not to use the full 20% and are only going to use approximately 770,000 of CDBG CV funding for administrative costs. If they had utilized the full 20% out of the 11.4 million, that'd be almost 2.2 million that'd be available by administrative costs. However, the focus is trying to get these dollars out the door and into programming areas. Moving on to slide 97. There were additional grants that were received by Bureau are now reflected in the budget and financial plan, including, and these amounts are over the 4 years of the financial plan. The CDB CV CARES Act funding, total of 11.4 million. the city's RISE grant funding at $900,000, Local Initiative Support Corporation LISC funds at $400,000, the Treasury Grant Assistance at $800,000, the Lead Hazard Grant at $1.9 million, and then Bureau continues to look for new revenues. And just for a reference, most of these, the Treasury Grant, the Lead Grant, CDB, CV, are all estimated to be spent down by year 3 of the financial plan. Bureau is including prior year allocations as a current year resource for the CDBG and home funds. Bureau's revenue forecast is conservative in the out years, and they've identified adequate funding for administrative costs over the financial plan. Moving on to slide 98. Bureau does not participate in the City of Buffalo's self-funding of health insurance and continues to maintain coverage through Blue Cross Blue Shield. There's annual increases of approximately 6% included in the financial plan. Bureau currently holds 32 properties valued at $3.2 million. Intent is to continue to strategically assess portfolio and sell properties. The neighborhood framework plan is ongoing, allows multiple stakeholders the ability to coordinate with each other and agreed upon housing goals and objectives. Moving on to slide 99, slide 99, we have the Bureau staff schedule. You'll see that there's an increase of 5 positions between fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22. Those 5 positions are all associated with the additional CDBG, CV grant funding. Those are 5 temporary positions, and they're held flat at 44 over the financial plan. And as the funds are spent down, these non-permanent positions will be evaluated and determine what their status will be. Slide 100. So moving on to slide 100, and we'll turn it back over to Executive Director Rowe.
Jeanette? Whoops. Are we going to proceed?
I was having trouble unmuting. I couldn't find the button. With all these Zoom meetings, I would have it down by now. So anyways, I'm cracking myself up over here. So let me share. Can you see my screen? You can see my screen. I'm share screening. Okay. So we have concluded that the financial plan for Borough is balanced and is in compliance with the provisions of the BFSA Act. The financial plan modification that addressed the influx of the federal stimulus funding that this board reviewed at our March board meeting has been appropriately carried forward into the financial plan. It appropriately reflects the dollars that are available as well as the spend down requirements for these funds as well. So that's important to note that there is a time when these funds have to be used, and that has been built into the plan. The financial plan includes appropriate estimates for the settlement of labor contracts and the extension of similar terms to unrepresented employees. It's important to note that the 2020 census results have not yet been released, and we don't know at this point in time how that will impact future funding for Borough. Currently, the organization has included 2% increases in entitlement funds in 2023 and 2024. The pandemic has had little impact on Borough's operations. Even during the shutdown, the services were deemed essential and weren't put on pause during the New York State pause order. We are just noting that it's possible that extenuating circumstances associated with the pandemic could impact the timetable or the cost for different programs and projects, which is a general caveat that we have within our staff report. However, we have confidence that Borough management would be able to address any types of issues as they arise in an efficient manner. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Jeanette or Nathan? about Bureau? Okay, hearing none. Additionally, a report on the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority's third quarter operations was emailed separately to you. At this time, I will ask for a motion to receive and file this report.
So moved.
Is there a second? Discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, passes. We have now completed our review of the financial plans as submitted to the authority. The draft resolution related to the results
Chair
of our
Olson,
review was emailed separately to you.
Chair Olson,
Yes,
I am so sorry to interrupt.
that's quite okay.
We have one more financial plan for
Okay,
the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority. But before we continue with Borough, we already received and filed the quarterly report for the Housing Authority. Could we do the same for the third quarter report for the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency?
yes, is there a
So
motion?
moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay, that
Thank
carries.
you. Thank you. And with that, Nathan, if you could present on the BMHAs. Thank you.
Very good. The following is BFSA's analysis of BMHA's fiscal year 2021 adopted budget and 22-25 adopted financial plan. The consolidated budget and financial plan were approved by BMHA's Board of Commissioners on April 19th. The plans were submitted to the BFSA on April 30th and include the individual asset management program, central office cost center or COCC, section 8, and marine derived budgets and financial plans. Okay, briefly here, there's several very large economic factors which impact BMHA and impacted the budget and financial plan. These include congressional HUD funding, the local economy's status, including unemployment rates, the CDC's and New York State's moratoriums on tenant evictions, and finally, the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan Act impact on BMHA's finances. The following depicts BMHA's consolidated financial plan. Revenues exceed expenses in each fiscal year by a combined $10.8 million. After adjusting the financial plan by backing out debt service expense and removing the non-cash OPEB accrual, the cumulative 4-year cash impact is a net $8.8 million. The revised 4-year cumulative surplus is $7.6 million after eliminating Section 8 surplus. Section 8 is a quote-unquote pass-through entity, so this adjustment seemed to be more prudent, as a more accurate depiction of their 4-year financial picture. Consolidated revenues include the HUD subsidy, rental income, HUD Public Housing Authority voucher grants, transfers from capital grants, and other miscellaneous revenues. Revenues are projected to increase $3.5 million or close to 7% on a consolidated basis. Most significantly, the HUD subsidy is projected to increase at the greatest rate of about 9% or $1.8 million based on proration of 96% of eligible costs. The current proration is 97%, 96% seemed like a fair and reasonable estimate. Consolidated expenses include general expenses, maintenance, administration, utility, protective services / resident service costs, as well as other miscellaneous expenses. They're projected to increase $1.5 million or 3% on a consolidated basis over the financial plan. The most significant increase of these would be utilities, which are projected to increase at the greatest rate of about 9% or $500,000 based on a 2% inflationary rate. The budget and the financial plan include 159 full-time equivalent positions, including 2 fewer executive level positions and 1 additional capital improvement and 1 additional personnel full-time equivalent position. This table here shows how the 2021 adopted budget compares with the current fiscal year, most recent counts, as well as budget and the financial plan. Total employee salaries and benefits are budgeted at just south of $14 million in 21-22 and are projected to increase $600,000 to $14.4 million over the financial plan. This is based on, within the first 2 years, it's based on the current contractual terms for labor agreements, and then an increase of 2% in the 3rd and 4th out year of the financial plan, assuming that the similar terms will be agreed upon for the labor agreements when they do expire at June 30th, 2023. So taking a look at the individual budgets and financial plans, the first one is the largest, the AMP 2022-25 financial plan. AMP revenues account for $35 million, or about 69% of total 21-22 estimated revenues. Expenses account for $33.2 million, or about 67% of total 21-22 budgeted expenses. The 21-22 AMP adopted budget depicts a $2.1 million in net operating income. The cash impact is $1.7 million after $1.7 million of debt service payments, and removing a non-cash $900,000 OPEB accrual is a positive $1.3 million. BMHA budgeted rental receipts at a level that reflects the impact of the current recession and the status of the eviction moratoriums. So it's adjusted downward based on those 2 factors. The additional HUD subsidy revenue will be received as per the increased appropriation for the CARES Act and because of the lower rental receipts. COCC revenues account for $9.1 million, or about 10% of total 21-22 estimated revenues. Expenses account for $5.2 million, or about 10.5% of total budgeted expenses. BMHA budgeted a net operating loss of $100,000 in fiscal year 21-22. This net loss is projected in each fiscal year for a cumulative 4-year deficit of $900,000. The cash impact is $300,000 in fiscal year 2021 after removing a $500,000 non-cash OPEB accrual. The 4-year cumulative surplus of $0.7 million is budgeted after removing this the cumulative $1.6 million OPEB accrual. Moving along to Marine Drive. Marine Drive revenues account for $3.2 million, or 6% of the total 21-22 estimated revenues. Expenses account for $3.5 million, or about 7% of total expenses. Marine Drive adopted budget includes a decrease in rental receipts of $300,000 over the 2021 Marine Drive adopted budget. Net dwelling income is almost the entirety of the entire Marine Drive revenues. It's been deeply impacted by the recession. The 21-22 cash impact is budgeted at a negative $400,000. The 4-year cash impact is projected to be $1.1 million unfavorable, or excuse me, a negative $1.1 million. As each fiscal year in Marine Drive financial plan includes a negative cash impact, a structural deficit is depicted within this plan. If there are losses incurred, such losses would need to be funded by available Marine Drive reserves and potentially through COCC current year operations or through COCC reserves to the extent that it's possible. And the 4th individual budget and financial plan is the Section 8 2022-25 financial plan. Revenues and expenditures are at a wash at $7.7 million. This is a self-balancing fund, and so the revenues received go almost entirely out as housing choice voucher grants. The CARES Act that was provided, CARES Act provided additional Section 8 funding of $1.25 billion in overall funding. I have not been able to quantify the Section 8 impact on BMHA alone, but that is an outstanding question. And just as noted, is a pass-through entity, any reported surplus or deficit is temporary in nature because the program self-balances. This concludes my brief overview of the consolidated and individual budget and financial plans.
Any questions? Hearing none, okay. Do we now turn to the resolution?
I just have a few summary points on the BMHA quickly,
Okay.
very quickly. One of which is our conclusion overall is that the financial plan for BMHA is balanced and has met the provisions of the BFSA Act. The financial plan that you're reviewing today, this is the final one. It's been approved by the BMHA's Board of Commissioners. That's unlike the other three plans. So if there are changes to the financial plan between now and June, we'll review those other items at our June meeting. Unless any of the directors had any questions for BMHA representatives, they were invited to this meeting, but I don't see any in attendance. So we could certainly put that on our agenda if there were some questions for management. The plan projects a combined operating income of 10.8 million with a net cash inflow of approximately 8.8 million, taking into consideration the cash payment for principal and then backing out the non-cash OPEB accrual. So those are the two items that Nathan was talking about. A recommendation, although it's a fairly minor recommendation, is that the individual budget for Section 8 should be balanced to zero. At long term, while I understand that individually within years there would be income or there would be more expenses going out the door than income, all due to timing, overall, the program does not generate a net income. So by including net income individually for that organizational unit over the financial plan, net income overall is being overstated for the financial plan. There's 3.2 million of Section 8 income that is included in this financial plan. Backing that out, it brings it to 7.6 million. So it still is at a net income, but it's more transparent to present it without any Section 8 net income. Individually, the budget for Marine Drive Apartments is not balanced. There's a $0.7 million net loss projected over the financial plan and an even larger cash outflow projected for 1.1 million. The reserves of 452 million are insufficient to cover the cash needs that are projected for this unit. We recommend that BMHA prepare a contingency plan to reduce costs where possible to address losses that are reported and to implement a revised operating program. The COCC operations, they also present a 4-year cumulative deficit of 0.9 million before accounting for the non-cash items. After taking into account, I said non-cash, but it's actually cash for principal payments and non-cash OPEB accrual, combined difference. It does push central office cost center into a positive cash flow situation. So we don't see any cash needs over the next 4 years, but it is important to closely monitor this because any shift would draw on the existing reserves, and that is obviously a limited resource. All collective bargaining units and non-represented employees do have salary increases built into this financial plan, consistent with what we've seen with Borough and the City of Buffalo. And we've already talked about the revenues and expenses being fairly stated. So thank you for allowing me time for those summary comments. I appreciate it.
No problem. Any questions, comments? Okay. We've now completed our review of the financial plans as submitted to this authority. A draft resolution related to the results of our review was emailed separately to the board members. Additional information to support certain revenue estimates is requested from the mayor to be able to determine whether the financial plan's revenue projections are reasonable. The resolution finds financial plans of the Buffalo City School District, the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency, and the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority is submitted on April 30th in compliance with the provisions of the BFSA Act. May I have a motion to approve this resolution?
So moved.
I'll second it. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Okay, unanimously passes. Is there any new business? Hearing none, this will conclude this meeting of the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
I'll second. We'll just take that by consensus.
Thank you.